So how would you relate this to like writing? Like if you, what would you, uh, what would be your thumbnail stage for writing?
So for me, it would be doing an outline, right? So before I try and do any story, outline from beginning to end, because you can't do a story unless you know where you're going, right? Which is a thing that a lot of writers forget, and they just start writing. They have an idea and they just start going, but you don't quite know where you're going. Your story is going to go all over the map because you have no destination. So the first stage is outlining, then detailed outlining. So as opposed to just point forms, going back in and being like, okay, so in this chapter, here's a big chunk of what's going to happen, or on this page when we're talking a comic book, right? Like we kind of did that at the beginning where we started just going through like the emotional feel of this page. We sort of did my version of thumbnailing early on because we had to sort of get to a finish point of the story before we could get into these visuals. But really sort of dissecting things down. Dialogue tends to be the very last thing because it's usually the hardest thing, right? So you kind of have to make sure that you know your characters, you know your story, you know all about their emotional arcs, all the things that are happening, and then start feeding dialogue. What would they say in these situations, as opposed to starting with dialogue and then trying to figure out the story. You really need to know your characters well. So as I said, the sort of the early episodes were kind of my version of this, which is when we did multiple episodes where we sort of went through the story stages and broke it down piece by piece until we really got to a place where the story was solid. We knew every single page what was going to happen. Yes, it was still open for interpretation with the visuals, but really we've sort of stayed on target in terms of the emotions of the page and the overall pacing of the story.
Right. And so with that, that's interesting. You can actually take similarities from
Mhm.
the different aspects of the process, but like you're the writing, if you're just a writer, can you use some of what we're doing here in the
Mhm.
visual form and make it applicable to your writing, right? And vice
Yeah.
versa. Like if you're, an artist, how would you look at like taking some of the things in writing where, as I said, if you're like going to write to a finished face, you go, wait a second. Okay, in writing, you create like an outline, a single sentence of the premise or a
Exactly.
theme, and it's really a very simplified thing. So maybe I need to like instead of putting the eyes and the nose, and maybe I need to create the whole form outline of the form first, right? So there are ways to transfer those ideas. I like that.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the hard part is that the fun stage is the final product. And we all know that, right? It's being able to be
Absolutely.
like, oh, I want to, write this scene and I want to write all the dialogue and I want to do all this, or I want to, draw that final frame I have in my mind, that final panel. But you have to resist the urge to jump to that because you might not get your best work if you skip some of these preliminary stages. Because this is where you get the depth, right? Like a lot of the stuff that has come up visually as we've been talking, we didn't initially start there. And it came from looking at it in these thumbnails and thinking, is this telling the story I want to tell, both from a visual and a story perspective? Um, and that wouldn't have happened if we jumped straight from like, okay, here's our character, here's our space, let's go to finals. We would have missed some really nuanced storytelling that's come out of
Mhm.
this. And it was the same, we did the stage with the emotional, every page had a different emotional beat. Had we skipped that, we would have been a little bit less specific in terms of how we could move this character from a completely normal set of, I'm just moving into a new apartment to complete emotional breakdown in 5 pages. We really needed to know every page what needed to happen in order to get there so that on page 6 we could have this reveal and kind of back to the beginning. But those steps were incredibly important to give us anchors and a direction so that we could actually achieve it in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, well, that's right. It feels like it's a lot of work to do in the initial part, but then it saves you so much time when you
Mhm.
get to the finished part down the road that you'll thank yourself for taking the time. It just yeah, it's like you want to eat your cake, but first the
Yeah,
cake has to be made, right?
exactly.
So
Exactly, and if you skip an ingredient, cake doesn't taste so good. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So just to go over what I'm doing here, my thoughts, I am trying to you probably have seen me like shift things, like grab something and shift it over. So
Mhm.
what I'm doing here is I'm really I'm blocking the scene because I'm thinking ahead. I know what the story is at this point, so I'm trying to go, okay, um, what are the things that I want to make sure that we see later down the line that's going to help tell this story in a way that is a little bit more compelling. So one of the things I just did was actually there's a plant that we have that's going to help give us the uh, kind of point to the door. It's going to
Mhm.
help us a passage of time. And I thought, why not use it to actually, um, you know, just like have its shadow kind of put its creepy little like
So, like, a little, like,
fingers
tiptoe.
onto the door there a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
you can't maybe see it as much when you're looking down, but then what I'm going to do with this next scene. So I think for now I'm pretty good with this.
Mhm.
I'll come back to it just because there may be things I need to add. But in this scene here, where we have, and this is going to be panel number 2, so I'm going to take this perspective away so it's not in the way. And, as you notice here, I'm really just creating the form still of the person. So I'm really not changing too much of what I created initially and just adding a little bit more detail with it. But let's say that we see them holding a box in panel 1,
Mhm.
still holding the box. Maybe they're trying to figure out where they want to put it. So I'm putting in, very basic shapes here, but I also want to make it so that we can see that they're now realizing there's a door there. And maybe the reason why they notice the doors is like a shadow, the plants on it, and it's just making it kind of look creepy, right? So
Mhm. I like that.
yeah, like it's not something that we had talked about. Our this is what's great about doing this is being able to on the spot go, ooh, what if I were to do this? What would
Mhm.
that look like if I were to add that in there? And if it doesn't work, I can just very easily remove it. But it does create an interesting kind of aesthetic on the door that would make it a little bit more noticeable to the person coming in the room, right? Because like
Yeah.
let's say you're just moving boxes in and there's a door there, but you may not, you're not familiar with the room
Yeah, it
yet.
might not register immediately.
Exactly. Things aren't going to they're not going to feel out of place with you. And if you're not familiar with the room you've just moved into, right? So,
Mhm.
um, this
No, we
is
need
like,
something to
oh,
draw Sam's attention to it, and I like the plant because of the type of plant, it already the shadow has a creepiness to it, right? Like, almost like a hand or like an octopus or something, that is gonna make you do a double take and look over and be like, "What is that?" Um, which is which is neat. The other thing I was gonna say is maybe sticking out of that box should be a clock.
oh yeah, there we go.
Because if you haven't caught up on the clock story, you can check out our Twitch episode where we talk about the broken clock, and that sort of became part of the door lore, just in and of itself. So now we're working that side story subtly into the door story just by having this clock present, because that in our other sort of side story became what made the door appear. It's this powerful talisman type thing that brings the door to the house. So we're never going to mention it. It's not going to be said anywhere, but it's one of those details that if we work it in, it becomes a bigger universe than just this one room.
Yeah. And even if we don't do anything with it, it's fun to create questions for the
Hmm.
reader to go, well, if things haven't been answered. I wonder what else is, going on. Like, is there more to this story? Um,
Yeah, especially because when we go to, page 6, part of what we added in the new version of it is that the new person that comes into a different time, a different place also has a clock, right? So even
yeah.
if we never reference it, a reader who's looking at details might be like, "Wait a second, both of them had clocks with them when they came in." And again, it's the kind of stuff that those little Easter eggs that reward people for paying attention. And in this kind of a medium, those are great to add in because your reader will appreciate that you put in details that they might not get on first glance.
Yeah. Um, so I don't know if you just noticed I kind of shifted this to more like of a diagonal
Mhm.
as opposed to like upright.
I like it.
Um, One of the reasons why I did that is that there's something about uh, diagonals that are a little bit more interesting to look at. And
Mhm.
also, you remember, well, this may be before your time, but there was a 1960s Batman live action show. I'm sure you've heard of it, but
Mhm.
one of the things they used to do is to like make it so that either you knew you were in like the villain's lair and something bad was happening or they were about to fight, they would have like everything in an angle. And
Oh,
it's a
okay.
Dutch angle. It's called a Dutch angle.
What?
And so in comic books, I'm not, I can't be sure where that came from, whether that was something that existed prior. I imagine it
Mhm.
probably did. The idea of a Dutch angle for sure existed for a while, but the idea of using like in a comic book setting, that angle, whether the live action took it from a comic book or that was something that they created in live action. And from there, comic book
Right.
artists started using it. I don't have the answer to that. I'd have to look it up to find out which came first. But it does for sure. It creates like a bit of like it's a little off putting, right? It's not, something
Absolutely.
isn't quite normal when things are at an angle. I may even do it a little bit more because I'm thinking it's a little subtle. It's too subtle. I want it a little bit more.
Well, and I think it goes back to what the exercise you just did on the first panel of perspective, right? And how something being in a correct perspective makes it feel like anchored in reality and it makes it feel like your brain can just understand it. Dutching everything a little bit, your brain is like, wait a second, that's not how things are supposed to look. And it is a little bit, it feels wrong, off putting, a little sinister. And I do think just like kind of subtly adding that in just sets the tone that something in the space is not quite right.
Yeah, yeah. It does a lot of things. It with that and the beauty of working digitally is I can do it
Yeah.
by
Can just Dutch it a little bit, no problem.
yeah, just by grabbing it and moving
Mhm.
it. Um, so going on to this third one here, one of the things that you see, I'm kind of creating panels as I'm going, but actually, I'm thinking maybe I won't do a panel there. I'm actually going to leave it open in a way that
Mhm.
makes it feel a little bit bigger than it is, right? So if I'm starting to lay out, okay, there's another panel there. So there's like right? So now when I'm looking at this, if I were to um, look at the third panel there, it almost feels like it's coming out a bit
Mhm.
more,
Yep.
right? And in fact, I haven't decided. These are all decisions that aren't necessarily like you don't have to make them right here. I don't think they're super important, but I was thinking this initially panel one was going to be a bleed, but maybe it's not. I don't know. I haven't. Do you have any thoughts on that? Leave it
Mm,
open or let it actually make it into a panel?
I kind of like it being a bleed only because it feels a little more ominous, right? Like it's right off the edge of the page, like almost like there's you're looking at it from above and there's no kind of ceiling, right? Like it's almost like
Mhm.
you're seeing inside the room. So I do like the bleed idea. I also really like that panel 3 being an open panel because of the motion where we've been pretty static, in the first two, that having that open one makes it feel even more frenetic, right? Like he's like moving himself across that space really fast. So I do like that idea a lot.
Okay, so I think I've come up with a compromise to what you're asking or what you're saying. Because on the bottom here, that there's going to be a line actually on the bottom of panel one
Mhm.
because otherwise, if I leave it open, it's, I mean,
Yeah, I don't mind it being closed on the bottom there between one and then the next line of panels at all.
yeah, I think it kind of has to just
Yeah.
because, and again, these are things I can change. I'm just right now, these are quick little things that I'm thinking about and
Mhm.
they're not necessarily going to stick. this is all part of like being able to problem solve very quickly some of these issues, and some of them you may decide need to be figured out imminently, and some of them you're like, ah, they can wait. It's
Yeah.
not changing the story very much if I don't know exactly what's happening here. Um, and then, because the other thing is, I may decide to make this third panel a closed panel anyway. I haven't, I don't
Mhm.
know.
Well, I think that's the nice thing with doing it like this is, we can kind of see the options relatively easily, right? As opposed to it being either hand drawn where it's a lot more effort to go back and forth, or so refined and finished that changing from an open to a closed panel or that kind of thing ends up affecting a lot more things. Whereas right now we can kind of be like, does this feel right? Let's look at it in a couple options and decide which feels the best. Because like I said, the bleed at the top and the side immediately spoke to me just because of the kind of panel that it is, but it doesn't have to be, right? If being a closed panel is going to work better for the whole flow of the page, then that's fine. Definitely open to what's going to be the most effective way to tell the story.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause also now I'm drawing the character and I'm going, oh, wait, you know what? We're looking down on them.
Mhm.
Um, so, like, and I'm making it feel like they just kind of rushed over there to, let's see, where were we saying the doorknob was on the left side, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that means I shift over everything a little bit. So it may need to be a closed panel just because of
Mhm.
the mechanics of what is happening here. Um, I'm not sure. The beauty of this is, these are the little things that kind of make for a a fun little, as I said, problem solving exercise. You're essentially um, seeing if you like it, if you don't like it. So to your point of that outline analogy before, where you're like,
Mhm.
first you start with very basic things, and then you go into a more refined outline. In some ways, that's where we're at here. We're kind of going into a little bit
Yep.
more of a refined outline, kind of seeing if there's things about this that like the little things that'll enhance it, that will make it right. So I'm shifting this again, I'm changing it again because I realize, well, I want to block it so we can see the doorknob. We have to. This is kind of an impactful moment, so
Mhm.
maybe it's actually more of this. The original angle was at. It's a little bit more accurate, right? So this is all kind of like happening quick little decisions just because I'm thinking about what's the most effective way to show what I'm doing in the most, dynamic way. And
Mhm.
you look at one thing, you're like, nope, that's not working. But then, you look at something else and you're like, well, that's working a little bit better, but it's not quite there yet. So, but you're working so small that at this stage, you can make these changes super quick, right?
Absolutely. And I think too, like, we added that element of the plant and the plant shadow. And then it'll be interesting, like, does that play into this frame? And in what way does it play into it? Is it just kind of like, Sam's now between the two of them? Is the shadow on Sam? Is the shadow beside, that kind of thing too? Because that was an element that was new.
Right. And you just made me realize, see, this is one of those things that happens where you're like, oh, well, if Sam is getting in between the light source and uh, like the light source of the plant,
Hmm.
right? Where the plant is like, so here's the thing. I've got to actually probably make this plant a bit closer. Um, but how is it going to show up here? To your point, are we going to see some of the plant shadowed on the door, right? Or are we going to
Hmm.
see? I guess if I were to do it this way, Sam's shadow is going to be more over here,
Yep.
and or is the plant's still going to be on the door. And the question is, do I want to keep that? Like is that working, or is that making it a little bit weird for the viewer, right? So maybe the answer is maybe I don't actually have the shadow on the door just because if I do, it kind of starts messing up some of this stuff here, right? Like,
Yeah, unless the way that Sam's between the plant and the door and the shadow, you can see a little bit of the shadow, like, against their back, or because of
ooh,
the angle now, the shadow just isn't visible in this particular shot because of, the way that Sam's come into the scene.
yeah. And so the light, I was going to explain this before. Actually, I'll bring this up again because it's helpful. So the way that light scatters is it's like they're both waves, but they're also rays. And
Mhm.
so you have these blue lines. So if the uh, just easier for me to remove some of these here. Okay. Um, yeah, that's probably accurate. So you have this light source emanating from the window, and it's kind of the rays are kind of going outwards like this. That's why when you look at Sam on the bottom of the panel one, the shadow is kind of going behind them, whereas
Mhm.
if you look at the plant, it's heading towards the door, so it's going in an opposite direction because the light's all scattering. It's not like it's not all in the same
Right,
direction, right? So
exactly.
and that's because the light source is coming from, let's say the sun is kind of almost, there's nothing obscuring it on the other side, and maybe the light coming in like this would mean the sun is almost at a setting. It's starting to set or rise, right?
Right.
Either one of them is really low. The light source is really low to the horizon line. All right, if
Mhm.
this is getting a little complicated, let me know. Anyway,
Nope.
so this is why you'd be able to see these light sources through this window in this way, because it's the sun's almost directly shining right through it. And so because of that, what makes it a really kind of interesting um, uh, dynamic in there, you have to figure out like, well, how do I want to use the light to point to things or to make things a little bit more dramatic, right? And so again, before we saw that the light was kind of pointing with the where the plant was. It means that Sam is going to be doing this a little bit with their light source, so it's not
Mhm.
going to on the door per se. Although there may be a secondary light source that does make the door a little bit darker because Sam is blocking the light. So again, these are all complicated things, but um, I'm thinking that for the most part, I think this works. If I remove this,
Mhm.
uh, I think it works, but like I'm not 100% sure. It's one of those things where I may leave this as a problem to solve another day, just because, um, and I may leave out details too. The more I'm trying to like work detail here, the more I'm going, this is really, it does feel like it just needs like, because it's an action scene. And
Yeah.
I'm also thinking maybe I want to change the perspective on Sam, but I'll leave it for now, because what's coming up next is a pretty simple, uh, Sam is like, I think in the midst of talking on the phone with their landlord. So we've skipped ahead to um, Sam is now against there's going to be like a phone, or let's say we're going to see the phone um, in the wall, and there's going to be this long cord because,
Mhm.
and later on down the line the cord becomes kind of like part of the story a little bit. So we're going to see Sam on the phone already, right? That's what
Yep.
we're doing here. We're
Yeah,
skipping
we're
ahead
we're cutting to
to
mid
one.
freak out conversation. So I have a
Um,
question for you,
sure.
something I just thought of. Um, so I'm wondering the door itself. So the shadow on it definitely draws the attention to it, but what if there was light coming from it?